Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. The poet of the people, who spoke for those who did not have words or power to speak for themselves. He was able to speak for the spirit of America. Today I present to you my good friend, Carl Sandburg. Carl Sandburg was born on January 6, 1878, in a three-room cottage in Galesburg, Illinois, to August and Clara Sandburg. They were very poor immigrants from Sweden, and later on met and were married in the United States. Carl was the second eldest of 7 children, and at the age of 13, he left school to work and help support his family. He worked jobs around his home city to supplement the income of his father from a railroad company in Illinois and his mother's wage as a hotel maid. At the same time, Sandburg ought to have graduated from high school. He left his hometown and traveled by train to Kansas in search of a job, hiding in train cars to avoid the purchase of a train ticket. Afterwards, he volunteered for the military service during the Spanish-American War, and afterwards qualified as a veteran for the college administration despite his lack of a high school diploma. His services in the war qualified him for a tuition-free education at Lombard College in Galesburg, where he attended for 4 years. However, he eventually did not receive a diploma. But there he met Philip Green Wright, an instructor who inspired the young poet to continue writing and actually funded the publication of his first collection of poetry, which were originally printed as leaflets. Sandburg didn't publish poetry for several years. Meanwhile, he worked as a journalist and taking a job as a secretary to the mayor of Milwaukee in Wisconsin. Nope, it's Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee's in Wisconsin, yeah. And taking a job as secretary to the mayor of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At party headquarters, he met Lillian Stitchin, younger sister of the painter and photographer Edward Stitchin, who was already making a name for himself in New York and Paris. Sandburg and Lillian Stitchin were married in 1908 and moved to Chicago in 1912, where Sandburg went to work as a journalist, sometimes using a pseudonym of writing for business journals and socialist journals and newspapers. During nearly 5 decades as a newspaperman, he was a local news reporter, and an investigative reporter, a war correspondent, and a movie critic. Sandburg and his new wife had 3 children in Chicago. Encouraged by his wife, Sandburg kept writing poetry, and most of it was free verse. His poetry was published in Poetry, a magazine, and Verse, and several other literary magazines shortly after the move, and convinced him to keep writing. Sandburg's poetry, celebrating with unwavering conviction all aspects of American life, surely significant for him because of the immigration of his parents. Chicago poems, Smokestead, were filled with Sandburg's ideas about the American dream, the magnificence of the nation, agriculture and industrial features, and the unique distinction of Americans. Sandburg won the Pulitzer Prize in 1950 for his collection of poems. His lifelong interest in Abraham Lincoln, which resulted in 2 multi-volume biographies, earned him immense respect and the 1939 Pulitzer Prize in History. Sandberg also published popular short stories and poetry collections for children, and the New American Song Bank, a book of American folklore for adults. Sandberg lived his last 22 years of his life at Culminating, a 245-acre farm in Flat Rock, North Carolina, now a National Historic Site. When he died there, July 22, 1967, at the age of 89, nearly 16,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington for the national tribute to the poet of the people. On October 1st, 1967, his ashes were buried in Galesburg, Illinois. His birthplace is also now a historic site. So that was just a brief biography of my friend Carl Sandberg. But now I'm going to focus on the poem A Father to a Son, and I will be analyzing this poem as well as many figurative languages. So come follow me and we'll discuss this poem in depth.
A father sees his son nearing manhood. What shall he tell that son? Life is hard. Be steel. Be a rock. And this might stand him for the storms and serve him for humdrum monotony and guide him among sudden betrayals and tighten him for slack moments. Life is a soft loam. Be gentle. Go easy. And this, too, might serve him. Brutes have been gentled where lashes failed. The growth of a frail flower in a path up sometimes has shattered and split a rock. A tough will counts. So does desire. So does a rich, soft wanting. Without rich wanting, nothing arrives. Telling too much money has killed men and left them dead years before burial. The quest of lucre, beyond a few easy needs, has twisted good enough men, sometimes into dry, thwarted worms. Tell him time as a stuff can be wasted. Tell him to be a fool every so often, and to have no shame over having been a fool, yet learning something out of every folly, hoping to repeat none of the cheap follies, thus arriving at intimate understanding of a world numbering many fools. Tell him to be alone often and get at himself, and above all, tell himself no lies about himself, whatever the white lies and protective fronts he may use against other people. Tell him solitude is creative, if he is strong, and the final decisions are made in silent rooms. Tell him to be different from other people, if it comes natural and easy being different. Let him have lazy days seeking his deeper motives. Let him seek deep for where he is born natural. Then he may understand Shakespeare and the Wright brothers, Pasteur, Pavlov, Michael Faraday, and free imaginations, bringing changes into a world resenting change. He will be lonely enough to have time for the work he knows as his own.
In the 20th century, Carl Sandburg was one of America's finest poets. His poem, A Father to His Son, was written in the year 1936 and is about a father giving his son a set of guidelines on how this young man should live his life. The father shows his son how to get through the uncertainties and the complexities of life. And in this poem, the person who's speaking is an observer and is imagining what he thinks the father is trying to tell his son and the advice that he wants to give him. The theme of this poem is of maturation process because the son is moving on from boyhood to manhood, and the father wants to give his son the knowledge from his own experiences so that he can be successful in life and avoid the same mistakes that he made. The form of this poem is of narrative, and there is a sense of uncertainty and conflict. There's no major setting in this poem, so that this scenario can happen to whoever is in this situation. The only thing that the reader knows is that there is simply a father and a son. This allows any relationship between a father and son to be able to relate to this poem. The father shows the son many possible outcomes on how his life might turn out to be. Meanwhile, he encourages his son to pursue his own interests and be independent. Now that you have a general gist of this poem, we'll have a look in detail. I will be discussing 4 lines that are very important to me. The first line is, "Life is hard. Be steel. Be a rock." For me, this is a very powerful line, since it basically sums up the whole poem. I interpret this line as, life is hard. Be harder. Because no matter how hard life is, the father tells his son to be harder. For all the challenges he faces, he has to be stronger. For me, this is the most significant line of the whole poem. Now the second line I want to talk about is, life is a soft loom. Be gentle, go easy. In this line, Sandberg explains the qualities and benefits that come from being hard as well as being soft in certain situations. This also shows how gentleness will always prevail when tough blows in life come. He personifies life to be soft, following his statement of life being hard, because he shows with aspects of life, there are some that he will encounter that will be much harder than others. The third line I want to talk about is, tell him to be many fools. Through this line, Carl Sandburg shows how in society, many will criticize you for being different or trying to progress. He must leave the skeptics behind, because in reality, they are the fools. The father wants his son to seek and be ambitious. The father also believes that in life, it should contain both work and entertainment. Now the fourth line and final line that I'm going to talk about is, so does a rich sail wanting. Without rich wanting, nothing arrives. In this metaphor, Carl Sandburg isn't speaking directly about money, but rather telling his son to have strong personal goals and to persevere. However, he also warns his son that in possessing too much is a bad thing and can corrupt him as a person and leave him with a bad conscience because he is blinded by greed. Sandburg is amongst the most beloved American writers and is immensely popular poet. This poem, A Father to His Son, really gives an insight on how important parenting to a child is, because as much as a children may think they know, we all need a guidance from a parent. To wrap up this talk on Carl Sandburg, he used poetry to express his political views and used his experience working and traveling to influence his poetry. He wrote the poem A Father to His Son with an attempt to convey the message that life is hard, and shows how a father speaks to his son about the things that the world has to offer, what he might need to know as in terms of life. This poem is very applicable today because we must listen to our elders and learn from them, because they teach us from their experiences. Well, it looks like we're running out of time here, but the last thing I want to touch on is a quote from Carl Sandburg that speaks volumes to me. To work hard, to live hard, and to die hard, and then go to hell after all would be too damn hard. This is immensely powerful because it shows the kind of hard-working person that Carl Sandburg was and the intelligence that he had. And it really shows his views on what he really stands for in life. After his wonderful career as a writer and a poet, I hope that you have a mild knowledge or even an exceptional knowledge on who Carl Sandburg really was. So I just want to thank you for watching this video and give it a quick thumbs up and peace out.